Playwright Tony Kushner is here. He has been called the playwright of the 90s, earning critical acclaim for his Tony and Pulitzer Prize-winning drama Angels in America. The play about living with AIDS in the 1980s and 1990s changed the landscape of American theater. His new play, Homebody, Kabul, is his most ambitious piece of writing since that work. Years in the making, the timely play revolves around Kabul, Afghanistan. In the wake of September 11th, the work takes on a newfound resonance, and I am pleased to have Tony Kushner back at this table, certainly in anticipation of what many people are looking to as an important piece of work. Thank you.
Great to be back.
It's great to have you back. It really is. Now tell me where you've been since I last talked to you at the height of Angels in America.
Sort of all over the place. I've written adaptations of 4 different plays. I've written 2 opera libretti, the book and lyrics for a musical, which will be opening next fall at the Public. I've been working on this play and writing a bunch of essays and teaching and lecturing and doing whatever I could think of doing to avoid writing a full-length play, which I've now finally done. So this is sort of the next full-length play after the second part of Angels.
Okay. Tell me how it came into being.
I've always been interested in Afghanistan politically, the history of Afghanistan since the days of the Soviet invasion. And I have kept track of what was going on there all the way through the withdrawal of the Soviet army and the years of civil war and chaos, the rise of the Taliban, basically through reading the papers and other kinds of research. And an actress friend of mine in London, Kika Markham, who I've known for years, asked me to write her a one-woman monologue to do with a series of monologues in a theater that she belonged to in London. And I decided I'd write about Afghanistan. I went to the library. I found an old guidebook called A Historical Guide to the City of Kabul, written by a woman named Nancy Hatch Dupree, who's still alive and lives in Peshawar on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the book sort of inspired a strange character. I wrote the monologue for Kika, and then felt that the monologue was only a beginning of a story that I wanted to tell. And I started working on it, I guess, in like 1997, and then 99, I wrote the second and third acts of it, and it's now going up at New York Theatre Workshop.
And you completed it all before September 11th?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing rewrites, the kind of rewrites you do in, previews, sort of cleaning up characters and trying to get the length down. It's rather long, but nothing substantially has changed, and none of the political facts, none of the historical facts have changed. It was all written long before, like last January, so it is what it is.
What is it about Afghanistan?
I've always thought it was a place, for me it's been a place, I think, because I'm very interested in socialism. I'm very interested in the application and the misapplication of socialist theory, and the Soviet Union has always been a place that I've been fascinated with, the Russian people. I was very, very disturbed by the atrocious behavior of the Soviet army in Afghanistan, and it was, very much in the middle of the Cold War, sort of the end of the Cold War, the last big battle of the Cold War, in a sense. It was uncomfortable for me to feel that Ronald Reagan was doing anything right, but I supported, in a sense, the arming of the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union, the abandonment of Afghanistan by the West after the Soviets withdrew, and the sinking of the country into a kind of heavily militarized chaos, the destruction of virtually every city in Afghanistan in those years, and the rise of the Taliban. I'm always also interested in theocracies of all kinds because I find them threatening and fascinating. And so every time I've looked at Afghanistan and thought about Afghanistan, I found the things that I take for granted or things that I assume to be true about the world challenged in a useful way. And I've always thought this is a country. Really, when you read the history of the place, it's always been at the center of world history. It's always been a stage on which the world's historical figures have crossed and acted out. And so it seemed to me a very dramatic place, and I've been proven correct about that.
Now, before September 11th, and your friends would call you up and say, what's happening? And you'd say, I'm writing this play about Afghanistan. They would say, what?
Yeah, and why?
Afghanistan? Why?
And all the interviews that I gave about the play in the sort of early fall preview period of getting interviewed about new plays in July and August. Well, every interviewer's first question was, why on earth write a play about Afghanistan? Do you think anybody will care? And I would say, well, there's the Buddhas in Bamiyan and the Christian aid workers. I mean, the Taliban are always making news, so, it is something that isn't completely off the radar screen, and I think people should care about it because is now and will continue to be an incredibly important player in world affairs. I mean, for one thing, as a supplier of heroin to the rest of the world, which is, of course, of great interest to the United States. And people sort of shrugged and thought, well, good luck. I had no idea. I mean, I could never have imagined that we would be at war in Afghanistan. And I can't believe that the play is going to be opening after the Taliban have gone, which I guess is happening even as we're speaking.
You wanted to write about this country, and I want to know what you wanted to say in this play. And I know that's a terrible question.
Yeah.
And who are the characters you create to say it?
Well, I mean, I've always sort of believed that when you're writing a play as opposed to writing an essay or a book, you sort of allow your unconscious to take you where it wants to go. And I created this very peculiar character basically out of reading this rather magnificently written little guidebook, which was out of date when I read it in 1997. I think the first time I read it, it had been published in 1965 in Kabul. So the city that it described had disappeared. And I found that very moving, the relationship between this sort of city created by this magnificent language and this fascinating history living in a book and this decimated actual place. So this character emerged, this woman called the Homebody. You never actually learn her name. And she's an amalgam of different things the way I feel about Kika Markham, who's this actress that I wrote it for. If you want to see her, you can rent Two English Girls, the Truffaut film. She's one of the English girls. And my mother, who died 10 years ago, and the play really took me by surprise as being a play very much about, it's a play about a dead mother in a lot of ways. And the imagery that came out of reading about Afghanistan, of mutilated bodies and death and loss and grief and all of these things had a tremendous impact. So as much as it's about Afghanistan, I also think it's a play about a British family. They're British because I wrote it for a British actress to start with, and the other family members who appeared subsequent to the Homebody were, her family members, so they're all British. And the relationship between this sort of tormented life of a British family and this country that Britain and the United States have a tormented relationship too, and the way that people use other countries as metaphors for their own inner misery, and the way in which the divide between inner misery and outer misery is really permeable and can affect and transform, as I think people experience on a daily basis. It's why I think that writing about politics is really, in a sense, only to write about human psychology, because our inner life is always speaking very directly and transacting with great vitality with the outer world and with the world of politics and history, and there really isn't a clear divide. So that, I think, is in part what the play is about.
You are going to now read. I ask you to do this, because A, the writing is brilliant, and secondly, because it'll introduce us a little to, without having to know know more. So if you'll do this for me, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. It's supposed to be a British housewife, so you have to pretend that I'm a British housewife. I won't do the accent because that would be really quite ghastly. She has she's telling the story of searching through the city of London for hats for a party she's throwing for her husband. And she's found a store run by Afghan refugees, and now she's describing what happens in the store. She says, and this is what happened, and it's all there is to my little tale, really. The hats were in a barrel which could be seen through the window. Puppets hung from the ceiling, carved freestanding figurines, bowls, cups, canopic jars, fish, elephants, tigers, uris, jinns, bodhisattvas, demiurges, attributes, symbols, carven abstractions representing metaphysical principles critical to the governance of perfect cosmologies now lost to all or almost all human memory, flatware, basket wear carpet slippers, knitted goods, amber beads, big as your baby's fists, barbaric brazen metalware, armor plates like pangolin scales strung on thick, ropey catgut cordage meant to be worn by rather large, rather ferocious men, one would imagine, or who knows. Hideous masks with great tusks and lolling tongues and more eyes than are usual, mind's eyes, I suppose, and revolving wire racks filled with postcards depicting the severed heads of the Queen and Tony Blair. Well, not severed necessarily, but with no body appended. Glaswegian A to Z guides and newspapers in Arabic and Urdu and Pushtu video cassettes of rock balladeers from Benares. Well, why go on and on? I'm sorry. We've all been in these sorts of shops, no bigger than from here to there, haven't we? As if a many-cameled caravan, having roamed across the entire post-colonial, not yet developed world, crossing the borders of the rainforested kingdoms of kwashiorkor and rickets and untreated gum disease and high infant mortality rates, gathering with desperate indiscriminateness, is that a word, on the mud-pitted, unpaved trade route its bits and boodle, had finally beached its great, heavy, no longer portable self in a narrow coal scuttle of a shop on here, caravanseride here, in the developed and overdeveloped and overdeveloped, paved, wasted, now deliquescent, post-First World, post-modern city of London. All the camels having flopped and toppled and fallen here and died of exhaustion, of shock, of the heartache of refugees, the goods simply piled high upon their dromedary bones, just where they came to rest, and set up shop atop the carcasses, and so on. I select 10 hats, thread my way through the musty heaps of swag and thrown away and offcast and godforsaken, through the merchandise to the counter where a man, an Afghan man, my age, I think, perhaps a bit older, stands smiling, eager to ring up my purchases and make an imprint of my credit card. And as I hand the card to him, I see that 3 fingers on his right hand have been hacked off, following the line of a perfect clean diagonal from middle to ring to little finger, which, the last of the 3 fingers in the diagonal cut's descent by hatchet blade, was hewn off almost completely, like this, you see? Then she goes on to imagine asking the man what happened to his hand, and this is what she imagines he says to her. I was with the Mujahideen and the Russians did this. I was with the Mujahideen and an enemy faction of Mujahideen did this. I was with the Russians. I was known to have assisted the Russians. I did informer's work for Babrak Karmal. My name is in the files if they haven't been destroyed. The names I gave are in the files. There are no more files. I stole bread for my starving family. I stole bread from a starving family. I profaned, betrayed. According to some stricture I erred, and they chopped off the finger of my hand. Look at my country. Look at my Kabul, my city. What is left of my city? The streets are as bare as the mountains now. The buildings are as ragged as mountains and as bare and empty of life. There is no life here, only fear. We do not live in buildings now. We live in terror, in the cellars, in the caves, in the mountains. Only God can save us now. Only order can save us now. Only God's law, harsh and strictly administered, can save us now. Only the Department for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice can save us now. Only terror can save us from ruin. Only never-ending war. Save us from terror and never-ending war. Save my wife. They are stoning my wife. They are chasing her with sticks. Save my wife. Save my daughter from punishment by God. Save us from God, from war, from exile, from oil exploration, from no oil exploration, from the West, from the children with rifles carrying stones. Only children with rifles carrying stones can save us now. You will never understand. It is hard. It was hard work to get into the UK. I am happy here in the UK. I am terrified I will be made to leave the UK. I cannot wait to leave the UK. I despise the UK. I voted for John Major. I voted for Tony Blair. I did not. I cannot vote. I do not believe in voting. The people who ruined my hand were right to do so. They were wrong to do so. My hand is most certainly ruined. You will never understand. Why are you buying so many hats?
It's brilliant, Tony. It really is. You must write for the ear, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I try to. I think that's a big part of what being a playwright is about.
A dramatist has to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it gives it a kind of, Brecht described it as electricity. He said that you take ordinary utterance and you sort of run an electrical current through it so that it keeps the ears open, which is a hard thing to do.
And she has to go back to the initial character. She has to go back to Afghanistan.
Well, she's never been. She's so,
Afghanistan.
for all sorts of reasons, personal reasons again, and just out of pure desire, it turns out, leaves London without really telling her family much, and goes to Afghanistan. It's August 1998, and she arrives a day before Clinton fires missiles into the suspected terrorist training camps at Khost. and then sort of terrible things happen.
Yeah. Now, what's the relationship with her daughter?
A tormented one. She has a very unhappy 23-year-old daughter who's had a kind of a tumble that's really knocked her off of her track. She's had some real sort of mental problems. She's come back home and she's living at home, and that is in fact one of the reasons why the woman flees her life in London. Because of, well, I won't go into the whole complicated thing, but the daughter and her husband arrive in Afghanistan looking for the woman's body after it turns out that she's been attacked by a mob in the demonstrations following the bombings in Khost. They believe she's American, and she's murdered. And these two people come to Afghanistan to find her body, and that's sort of the second and third acts of this play.
We will tell them no more.
Okay.
Several things have happened to you. Have you been, since Angels got Pulitzer and everything else, such extraordinary success in London, in the United States, are you conscious of how high that bar is or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a real struggle to just, I mean, I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I think all the essays and all of the sort of other work that I've been doing has been an avoidance. When I started writing the second and third acts of Homebody, I began to realize that it had been 1993, I think, was when I wrote, 92, 93 was when I really finished Perestroika, the second half of Angels. Right. And when I was back doing this, it felt strange, and I realized it had just been a tremendously long time since I had written a straight-out, serious drama, which is the thing that I think I ought to do. I mean, it's the thing that I feel that I do better than the other things that I try to do. So I guess I've been avoiding it, and I think that has a lot to do with being afraid of the next play. And I thought, you know, I hope that this sort of opens. I mean, I'm opening it at New York Theater Workshop, which is a theater that I've always worked at and that I love, but it felt like a kind of a way to slip back into town quietly, and I was writing about a subject that I really didn't think would immediately attract people's attention at the time. That's not why I chose it, but it felt to me like, okay, well, at least it's not another play about gay men living in New York, which would immediately invite comparison. This play is not at all like Angels, except that it's also very long.
How long?
I don't want to say.
Right.
It's long. It's 2 intermissions, and we're trying to make it a little bit shorter. I think it's now had 2 previews, and I think it's holding the audience. They really seem to be with it up to the very end. So.
Congratulations.
Well, thanks.
I should also say Angels in America is going to be an HBO multi-part series. Help me on this. Mike Nichols, Meryl Streep, Al Pacino.
Meryl Streep, Al Pacino, Emma Thompson, Ben Schenkman, Mary Louise Parker, Patrick Wilson, Jeffrey Wright, and Justin Kirk, among other people I'm sure I'm forgetting, but those are sort of the principal ones now. And that's
they may be up to it.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing cast and a great director, so it's exciting.
It's terrific to have you back in New York. It's terrific
great.
to have you with this play, and I can't wait to see it. December
19th is the opening night.
Yeah.
So.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you. Tony Kushner, Homebody / Kabul. We'll be right back. Stay with us.